Hey everyone, this is Mason Hutchison, and welcome back to Herb Rally, your daily herbal podcast. We come out with new episodes about 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in often. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey no matter what stage you're at. We have over 638 episodes, so feel free to peruse those episodes, and you're bound to find something of interest. Today is another installment of the Herbalist Hour, our interview series, and today I'm joined by Abby Artemisia. And Abby is a botanist, herbalist, and professional forager living in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. Raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and with a degree in botany from Miami University, Abby has since traveled the country learning about plants and herbal remedies. She has previously run an herbal tea business, worked on organic farms, and spent years playing in the woods. Her mission is to offer nature and herbal education, creating healing through connection with the natural world and each other. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Abby, and I really hope you do as well. If you'd like to check it out on YouTube, you could actually watch the video. This one was done via Zoom, but some of the Herbalist Hours are actually done in person, so that's always a lot of fun. But yeah, if you want to subscribe to us on YouTube, you can just find us by searching Herb Rally in the YouTube search bar. We also come out with around anywhere from, say, 1 to 3 to 5 herbalism videos per week. So if you dig the Herb Rally podcast, you're sure to love the YouTube channel as well. And yeah, all of the Herbalist Hour interviews are on there as well. So you could see our faces and whatnot. Also, it's kind of fun because you can interact by leaving questions or comments in the comments section of the YouTube video. Also, before we get into the show, I want to shout out our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members. Your support really means the world to us. You're really helping us keep the lights on here at Herb Rally. We really can't thank you enough. If you'd like to learn more about the Herb Rally Schoolhouse, it's only $10 a month, and you can learn more at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And again, it's really one of the best ways you can help support the Herb Rally podcast and the YouTube channel and everything else we do. And also with membership comes exclusive content in the member area. So you get also like bonus content from the podcast and YouTube channel. So yeah, one more time, herbrally.com/schoolhouse, and you can use coupon code podcast at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. Anyways, thanks so much for listening, and I will talk to you later. Take care.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
All right, well, welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today, I'm very excited to have on Abby Artemisia. Welcome to the show, Abby.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Mason.
Happy to have you. And I want to just kind of dive right in. I'm very curious how Abby went from a young gal to becoming an herbalist. Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Oh yeah, and it was quite the process. So I think this is like such a great question too, because beginning herbalists, I think, really need to hear this stuff. So because nobody's journey is the same. And I just surveyed my students about this, and it's so interesting to hear where people come from. So I always tell people that I was lucky or blessed enough to be able to be an outdoor kid. And so when I was growing up, I got to play outside all the time. It was pre-tech, pre-home computers, pre-cell phones. So dating myself, which is fun. And I was lucky enough to live in the suburbs of the Midwest, Ohio, Cincinnati. And I got to play outside pretty much as I wanted. I climbed trees. I ran around in the yard. We had creeks and woods behind our house. And so I would run around there and explore all the time. I was just thinking about this today, and actually we had outdoor education in our public school, which was pretty amazing and probably a product of being in suburbia, right? But I will always remember that situation. It was funny. It was like kind of like a Harry Potter type situation. It was like this tiny little space that the teacher had under the stairs. And she had like all these cool taxidermied animals in there and was just a super amazing person. And I was really drawn to that. And I got to go to a camp my dad had gone to, which was outside, and we did riflery and archery and swimming and all of the things, and just got to be outside a bunch. So I think all of those things led me into it. So I always recommend for parents, please push your children outside as much as possible. And after that, I when I turned 18, around that time, I started working in health food stores. So I learned that way. I started going to college for in environmental science. And then I know you have spent some time in Oregon. I went to Oregon State for a little while for forestry.
Oh, wow.
And did that. I could never like really find a program I liked, though. I actually went to 5 colleges because I couldn't find the right program. It was like forestry was split between natural resources folks and logging, and neither of those were what I wanted to do. And I moved around a lot. I was in Northern California for a little while, and Kentucky, and then back to Ohio. I had my daughter, and I really started learning about herbs then, I feel like, because I wanted to have a natural pregnancy and a natural birth. And then as she was growing up, she became my guinea pig. So, and when she was a baby, I was like, what work can I do where I can stay home with her and do something that I feel good about, that I actually want to do? And the thing that stuck was making my own herbal teas. And so I started my own herbal tea business way back in 2005. And I was doing farmers markets, and I met an herbalist there who says that I begged her to teach. And that was Leslie Williams, who is an amazing elder herbalist who definitely not enough people know about. She is now in Atlanta, but at that time we were both in Cincinnati, and she was there briefly, but she started teaching in her living room, and I brought my sweet baby daughter there and learned from her. And then let's see, started making my own medicine, was doing the tea business, but I was ordering all of my herbs. So I partly started this because I wanted to learn about herbs and the plants, but I was ordering all of the herbs, and they were coming from all over the world. And I realized, like, through doing that and through doing all of the jobs myself, as many of us do, I wasn't really connecting with the plants. And so then this opportunity kind of came out of the blue. I had always told myself, like, I'm not going back to school unless I find a botany program, not really thinking that I probably would, especially in Ohio. But it just so happened that there was another child in my daughter's class whose dad was going to school for botany at Miami University, which is actually in Ohio, but it's named after the Miami Indian tribe. So I started going to Miami, and I was so lucky, or maybe I manifested it or serendipity or whatever, but before I even started the program there, I started working the Botanical Conservatory, and I gained a mentor there. So the director of the conservatory would become my mentor, and he was a professor, Richard Munson, and we still talk today. We're still friends. He's still in Ohio. He's retired now, unfortunately, for all the botany students, but he was amazing. And the first class I took was field botany. And I always say, if I had taken Botany 101, I potentially would have dropped out again. So field botany was my very favorite. And he was an amazing teacher, and he was more of a naturalist, and so he would like pick up snakes in the middle of class and show them to us, and point out birds, and throw horned coral fossils in his backpack all the time. And so it was an amazing education. And I was actually just watching your interview today with Abra, and listening to her saying that she went to school and paid all this money, and it wasn't like she really got much of an education out of it. I'm like kind of torn on that whole thing, because I feel like I got an awesome, like just the fact that I got that mentor was huge, but I got a good foundation in botany, like the academic part of botany, which helps me today. But honestly, like beyond that, the most helpful thing really has just been having the diploma, so I can like tell people at conferences I have a degree in botany, and then they're like, oh cool, we want you to come teach. But you know, then you get a whole ton of debt, and like what do you have to show for it? So so yeah, I feel like I learned a lot on my own. I've been starting to tell this part of my story more recently, and I hadn't told it in the past, but I've been in a lot of car accidents. And it was partly my recovery from that, which is ongoing, that helped me learn a lot about herbs, a lot about pain. And part of my recovery, partly just for my mental health, was going out in the woods with field guides, which at that point, like I didn't have botany teachers. I hadn't gone to school for that yet. So it was me taking a Peterson field guide out in the field, which I've learned since, like Peterson field guides maybe shouldn't be called field guides, because they don't actually help you ID plants. But they're, you know, they help you once you know what the plant is, to figure out what to do with it. And I love them for that. And like, they're very near and dear to my heart. But yeah, it was not the easiest way to learn. And so that's why I feel like what I do is so important, because I take people out in the woods and show them and create that connection with the plants. And so I'm a lot self-taught. And so I think that helps me to really be able to teach in a less academic way. And beyond that, I still study today with Leslie. It's been honestly 18 years.
Wow.
And I also, like, we can talk about it more, but I created, well, actually, like when I first was at Miami, I had to do a project, and I connected with the Shawnee in that area, the Shawnee tribe, and I started studying plants with them. And everywhere I've gone since, I have somehow managed to connect with various Native folks, and ended up living actually in a very rural part of Oregon, about an hour east of Eugene, or south, I guess, of Eugene. And
so like the Roseburg area?
Yeah, exactly. So Yoncalla, if you know where that is. Yeah. And lived with a Native family and learned a lot from them. And then few years ago, right before the pandemic started, like literally a month before the pandemic started, I met someone who's now a dear friend, who is Cherokee. And that is kind of part of how the Wander School became a nonprofit. And I've been learning with the tribe ever since, and working with them. So I have learned an awful lot from them. And of course, just going to herb conferences as well. I learned so much from other herbalists, which I was thinking about it. I think that's how we met. I think we met like in person 2017 at the AHG conference in Oregon.
Yeah, that's coming back to me now. Yeah, I was like, I had to have met Abby at one point or another. I would have assumed was that like a Asheville or North Carolina event, but have you been to Wild Herb Weekend?
Yes, I teach at Wild Herb Weekend. This will be my third year, I think, teaching
I
there.
love that event so much.
Me
I love the
too.
location and everything about it. Your
Yeah.
story is so cool, and you know what? You foreshadowed a ton of the points that I want to cover. So, great
Right?
job. It's almost as if you're an herbal podcaster yourself.
Oh my gosh, it is, isn't it?
Uh,
Like I've done this before.
yeah. So I read on your bio that you have a vision board on your wall, and it says turn your passion into a career. That's the plan. You heard it on a TED Talk on this theme, and the speaker was talking about getting to the point where you just can't not do it anymore, in quotations mark.
Mhm.
That's how you felt, and you believe that we all have a calling and a gift. By not taking advantage of our gift, we wouldn't be honoring it. I was just curious if you could kind of speak more to that and maybe inspire some of the listeners to follow their heart.
Yeah. Dang, that's so good. I'm like, I wrote that bio a while ago. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, I haven't even looked at that for a while.
I gotta say, one of my favorite things to do for the podcast is just to kind of delve into the herbalists, like their Instagram and their website and stuff, and then kind
mm,
of formulate specific questions around it. And it's been
yeah.
so fun. I was like, that specifically really stood out to me. And so I was just very curious.
Aw, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for noticing that.
sure.
So yeah, honestly, part of it that I have realized very, very recently is I'm neurodivergent and I have like some kind of ADD, ADHD kind of thing. And
Mm.
I just thought like everybody was this way. And no, people aren't. But like I can't work a regular job. Like I am not able to work a regular job. I cannot pay attention. I cannot do the same thing day after day. I can't sit at a desk. Um, and also with my pain, honestly, like, okay, so I have my voicemail is like, hey, this is Abby, and I am out frolicking in the forest. And so whenever anybody calls me and leaves a message, they're like, oh, that's so cool. And then they think that all I do is frolic in the forest, which, like,
Yeah,
you do this
yeah,
work.
yeah.
It's like way too much. I'm sitting right here behind the
Right.
computer, but I
Yeah, it's
can only
ironic.
do, yeah, it is really ironic, right? As herbalists, what do we do most? Sit behind a computer. Um, but I can't do that all the time. And with my back pain, it's really hard for me to do that too much. So I get very claustrophobic, like and just like restless. I can't sit still very long and I can't be inside very long. Like I start like putting on my cranky pants. So I have to be outside. And so honestly, the times I'm outside the most are when I'm teaching. And I am so grateful to have this gift of being a teacher. And so the times I'm outside most are when I'm teaching, and I love it. And one of my friends, Luke Cannon, was just guest teaching for my herb school program last weekend. And he was like, one of the best rewards of this work is getting to hear students and watch them when they're like, ooh, when they're like seeing a plant for the first time or learning something that they never knew, or connecting with a plant that they've walked by a million times and never knew what it was, or that they could do anything with it, so I think like all of those things, just being able to do what I'm passionate about, being able to be outside, being able to lend that sense of wonder and awe to people and inspire people, because what I keep hearing other herbalists say is we need more herbalists in the world. And it's so freaking true, right? Like everybody says, now more than ever. So we need more herbalists in the world. And like, I don't want to, it's not all freaking lollipops and unicorns, right? Like healthy, fruit flavored, natural lollipops. it's freaking hard work. And like, I'm still working on making a living at this.
Yeah.
And like, there are some things I sacrifice to do it, and some things I feel like I live without. And so I would definitely tell people out there, like, if your goal is to be able to be like most people in America's idea of wealthy, and travel the world constantly, and like buy like have lots of expendable income to buy consumer products, like this is probably not the right place for you. I just want to be real honest about that. But I also do want to say, like, it is possible to support yourself. It may take quite a while though. Like, honestly though, how many people do any of us know who are like self-made millionaires, and especially who have done it in less than 10 to 20 years? Like, let's be real with people. You know, I don't want to lie to people. And to me, I have to remind myself of this constantly, but like, I am wealthy. Like, I get to spend time with my family. I get to be at home. I get to work from home a lot of the time. I get to be outside in the woods a lot of the time. I get to work with plants. I get to help myself and my family and my community with herbs. And like, it's super fulfilling. I don't hate my job. Like, I'm exhausted a lot of the time, but it's fulfilling, and I get to do this work. And so hopefully that answered your question.
Hey everyone, it's Mason. Just a quick interruption from the show to let you know about our 13 herbal freebies. If you go to herbrally.com, on the navigation bar at the top of the page, you'll see a button that says freebies. Just click there and you'll sign up for our email newsletter. And in exchange, we're offering 13 herbal freebies. That's ebooks, webinars, videos, downloadable audio, and discounts to cool herbal companies. So if you'd like to check out these freebies, as well as sign up for our email newsletter, we update you about current events, new monographs, new videos, etc. Just go to herbrally.com and click on the button at the top of the page that simply says freebies. Okay, that's it from me. Now back to the show.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember being back in Columbine School of Botanical Studies with Howie Brownstein here in Eugene, Oregon. And I've heard him say several times, like, well, while we're on a field trip, people like, Mason, this is my office. You know, we're in the old growth forest and stuff. And yeah, you're right. Like, I feel super wealthy too, in the sense that I get to do what I love. I get to hang out with really cool people, aka herbalists. Like, and plus, it's fortunate. Maybe one of the sayings that I live by is, "He is richest whose needs are fewest." And I've always been kind of a frugal guy, and I really like the simple things in life. And I think you're right. I think an herbalist is a really great career path if you're not necessarily needing that Gucci bag or whatever.
Right. Totally. Yep. And I would also make a recommendation to beginning herbalists, like, maybe don't quit your day job right away. Like, maybe keep your day job, maybe go down in hours gradually if you're able to do that, and build your following, build your income, and because it's a lot less stressful that way.
I know this is your show, but I got to chime in there too. I always tell people that with Herb Rally, I set a 10-year goal before I quit my day job, which actually was coincidentally at an herb company, Mountain Rose Herbs. I worked there for 11 years, but like, you know, the whole time in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm going to grow Herb Rally on the side, but I'm not going to like try to rush it. I'm going to spend 10 years doing this thing and continuously try to work on it. And as you said, grow the following and whatnot. But yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I'd like to kind of switch gears over to you talking about the Wander School. Generally speaking, like, what's the mission? And I'm also curious, why and when and how did you turn it into a nonprofit?
Great question. So I started the Wander School in 2015, soon after I moved to Appalachia. Well, some Eastern Ohio is Appalachia, but the mountainous south of Appalachia, Western North Carolina. And Wander is actually an acronym for
Oh, I didn't know
yeah,
that.
for
Okay.
Wild Artemisia, which is my last name, but is also a plant genus. If folks don't know, of this plant that's on my arm, there's Artemis. She's a moon goddess. And then also mugwort, which is in the Artemisia genus right there. So yeah, Wild Artemisia, nature, discovery, empowerment, and reconnection school.
Awesome.
So that is a huge part of my mission, is to help people connect and or reconnect, because most of us have some kind of connection, right, to nature already. Even if we don't have a daily connection, we have memories or something, right? That like tree in our front yard, or memories of something that happened when we were a kid, or our grandparents, or something we walk by every day. But we need some reconnection. And then the empowerment part is really like empowering everyone with our own healthcare and making it accessible, the healthcare and the knowledge. So those things are huge for me. And so the pandemic started, right? I met my friend Tyson Sampson. He's on my podcast.
Okay.
And I met him 1 month before the pandemic started. Actually, most amazing situation. My friend Jeannie Dunn, you might know her. She's the owner of Red Moon Herbs here in the Asheville area. And she had a party for Imbolc, or Bridget's Day. And it was a fire cider making party. And I think that was still when like it was illegal to use the words fire
I remember
cider,
those days.
right? Yeah. So that was February of 2020. And I had wanted to meet Tyson for a long, like ever since I'd heard of him. And turned out somebody was like, Tyson, he's right over there. And I was like, what? So he's sitting at this table of fire cider making ingredients. Such a great idea. Y'all, please do this. Like, just everybody brings an ingredient or two for fire cider, and then brings a jar. And then you make your own fire cider with the ingredients. And I, of course, being a forager, brought Wildcrafted ingredients. So one of them, we were actually talking about the mustard family before this conversation, but I brought toothworts, which is like a wild horseradish. And so when I have access to it, I'll substitute that for horseradish. And so I'm sitting at the table and end up talking to him. And I was like, I'd love to talk to you more. I would love to have you on my podcast, Wander, Forage, and Wildcraft. And
go subscribe.
That's right. I almost, I had to figure out which order to put the letters in, because it was almost WWF. And I was like, oh, wait, no, I can't do that.
World Wrestling Federation.
Right. So yeah, it was like, Tyson, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And he was like, okay, but you have to come out to Cherokee and visit first. And I was like, yes, I'd love to do that. So before I could get out there, the pandemic hit. And then I started seeing people on Facebook, especially my now friend, Linda Black Elk, posting, that folks from the Lakota and Dakota tribe up in the Dakotas needed herbs, like especially the elders who didn't want to leave their house because they didn't want to expose themselves to COVID, needed herbs to keep them healthy during the pandemic. And she and her husband were doing this amazing thing that they're still doing now, of putting together these bins full of native foods, and also foods that elders like that aren't native, and herbs, and then hand delivering them within like a 250-mile radius. And so she was putting the word out about that and needing herbs for that. And then all these herbalists were putting the word out on Facebook, like, hey, we want to donate herbs, but we don't know how to get them to where they're needed. And then Black Lives Matter happened, right? And the protests were happening and people were wanting herbs for the protests. And I was like, I know a lot of people. I know a lot of herbalists. I have a stupid big apothecary that just really needs to go somewhere. And so my idea was to connect all those people and things. And so the Wander School became a nonprofit to do that. And we started sending herbs and herbal medicine to Linda Black Elk in North Dakota, to some tribal folks in South Dakota, bringing things to the Cherokee, who also do a lot of foraging and wildcrafting on their own. So we do volunteer days out there and help them forage and process what they have foraged and wildcrafted, and package and label those things to be given away for free to the tribe. I've sent things to Tennessee for single moms, to some folks working in Puerto Rico, to the Gullah, which are the descendants of enslaved people in South Carolina who were like had the first free Black colony. So that's the nonprofit piece of it. And I mean, we also do education, and I try to give away education wherever I can to BIPOC folks.
Some of the work you've done kind of reminds me of, say, like what Herbalists Without Borders does. Are you affiliated with them in any way, or is this kind of a separate entity?
I love what they do. I have tried to get connected with them. It has worked here and there. I did work with the folks in Texas during what was happening with Uvalde. We sent herbs and medicine to them. And so I worked with Herbalists Without Borders in Uvalde a little bit. The chapter here in Asheville is kind of on and off. So I would love to get a hold of them more and work with them more, because honestly, number one, as herbalists, we need more community. It's surprising, even in a place like this, which is a hub for herbs, like how little community there seems to be. And like being an herbalist can be super lonely. Like you're either out in the woods or you're in front of your computer or you're reading a book, right? Yeah. And also, like, it's so tempting to reinvent the wheel, and it's like really not necessary. So band together with other people doing this stuff. But yes, I would love to work with Herbalists Without Borders more. I would also love to put the call out there. If there's anybody listening who thinks it's amazing what I'm doing, I am still learning how to run a nonprofit. So if you have a desire to help out and you would like to be on a board, very little requirements there, or you're a grant writer and would like to help out with that, or you have money, then please let us know.
Yeah. And where should they contact you? You want to say your email or just your contact form and your website?
Yeah, any of those, the wanderschool.com, wander with an A, and or just Abby, ABY, just Y after the B's, at thewanderschool.com. Any of those will work. Very
good. All right. Well, let's talk about right relationship in herbalism and herbal reparations. Can you tell us more about some of the social justice work you've been up to?
Yeah, for sure. So after the business became a nonprofit, I've been moving more and more into the social justice realm, because once you start working in Indigenous communities, it's really hard not to, I feel like, once you see what is going on. And there's just so much, like, there is, I guess I don't want to downplay the humanity in Indigenous culture, because I really want to celebrate that. There is just so much. I get back so much more than I put in. I feel like it is incredible being in Indigenous culture, and it works so much different than like Western culture, American culture, that is not Indigenous. So like European based American culture. So I'm really grateful for that. But there are also quite a few epidemics of things like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. People die all the time in their 40s. Like it is not, it's like the norm in Indigenous culture for a lot of people. And it's very sad. And once you're around that, at least for me, once I was around that for a while, I started realizing the causes of that. And the causes of that are oppression by white people. So yeah, so thinking about the history of herbalism, which I think definitely doesn't get talked about enough, a lot of the knowledge that we have in Western herbalism comes from Indigenous people and the descendants of enslaved people. And that knowledge has often been stolen. I think there's a lot of talk in herbalism today about acknowledgement and reciprocity, and that's where I started. But then I didn't feel like it went far enough, because it's like saying like, oh, thank you, Cherokee people, for giving me this knowledge that I'm using to make money off of teaching. And I don't want to mince words here. Like, there are several people I know out there who think that no one should get paid to teach herbalism. I don't agree with that at all. I have college debt. I have a family. I was a single mom for a very long time. I like give people medicine, and I mean, I guess I shouldn't say medicine, right? It's tricky, whatever. But that's a whole nother world. But anyway, what I see as medicine for myself. So yeah, all that to say, I think we need to go further than reciprocity into reparations for what has been stolen and the oppression that has been put onto people. Because when I asked my friend Tyson, like, what do you think is the main cause of all these epidemics and ailments and death, early death in Native communities? He said it's pretty simple. It's intergenerational trauma and grief. And that comes from oppression. So I look at it like, I am so blessed, number one, just to be born a white person. And a lot of times that's really hard for me to admit, but like my own privilege. And I have that privilege just by the color of my skin. And the privilege of being an herbalist and the privilege of being able to help myself with herbs. So how can I give back for that? And so that's giving back with herbs. And I also like have this issue where I can't walk past a plant that's food or medicine and like not harvest it. So my apothecary again is like ridiculously large, and it doesn't do anybody any good for it to sit there. So that's what I'm doing. I'm teaching, I'm giving away education and to BIPOC folks and giving scholarships, and also just learning how to be a better human and how to be a better teacher and how to be a better owner of an herb school through learning. There's a great program actually that I would love to share with your folks, and it would also be a great interview for you with the developers of this program, but it's called Woke Without the Work. And one of my co-teachers told me about it, and it's specifically for herbalists and people who have herbal programs or put on herbal conferences. And it's how to do that in a way that makes herbalism accessible for BIPOC people and BIPOC communities, but not just accessible, but pleasant and less difficult. So like some things they had said before that I hadn't even thought of was like, yes, we can give scholarships to conferences and to herb schools, but what about travel stipends? Like if you have your conference or your school in a rural place, like a lot of BIPOC folks don't have access to get there. So how are they going to get there? Are you going to provide a lodging stipend? And like some of those things, to be honest, I'm not in a financial place to do yet.
Yeah.
So I can only give, like right now, 2 scholarships and 2 work trade positions to my herb school curriculum. But like, what can you do? You know, what are we able to do? And educating ourselves, and even just like, how can we speak in a way that doesn't put a BIPOC person on the spot in the middle of a class? You know, like I love to have, like, half of my co-teachers are BIPOC people. And so, and I have BIPOC scholarships, and I'm in a very, very white region. And so that means I have like 1 to 2 BIPOC folks per class. Like last year, I was lucky enough to have 3. But it means like we talk about really hard things. And that means me not saying, like, singling out those people and saying, what do you think about this as a BIPOC person? You know, just being aware of those things, constantly doing the education, reading books like My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, to talk about like how we deal with racism from a somatic place, like from our bodies. And reading books like White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And there's just like so much more coming out all the time. And reading books like African American Herbalism by Lucretia Van Dyke, who I just had the honor of meeting, and books by Native American herbalists, and just exposing ourselves to more of those things and putting them out into the world as resources for other herbalists. But as far as right relationship goes, I really started learning about that from my Cherokee friends. And so one, I got adopted by a Cherokee granny a few years ago, Amy Walker. And one thing she says, like whenever I'm going to teach or have an interview, she's like, talk about how we're all connected. It's like, oh, right. Okay. Thanks, Granny.
Wise words.
Yeah, right. And I have an interview with her on my podcast as well.
Oh,
and
nice.
She is amazing. She is 80 years old, and she farms on 4 acres in the traditional homeland where they say all the Cherokee people were born. And so just thinking about how we're all connected, and not like, you know, a lot of times to white folks, we just think about how we're connected to other people, but it's not just people, it's how we're connected to the land, how we're connected to the animals, how we're connected to the mycelium and the bacteria and the bugs and the water and the air, you know, all of the things. And when I was on Rosalie's podcast, like we talked about bee balm, and Tyson had told me that the Cherokee word in the Cherokee language, which they call the syllabary, the name for bee balm is Walelu Unitsagisti. And what that means is hummingbirds, they eat it. And I freaking love that so much. And it's like, that's how all their plant names are, right? It's like, not these Latin names, which were actually created to separate the classes so that people in the lower classes couldn't understand Latin, so they couldn't speak to other people about these plants. It's to make it accessible for everyone and to remind everyone how we are related to the plants, how the plants are related to the other beings, and how it's all connected. So that's what I think of with right relationship. But also it's like, if I'm not acting in a good way toward the plants, or I'm not acting in a good way to the people, if I'm not giving back, you know, what kind of herbalist am I? So that's kind of how I try and live my life. Not kind of, that's how I try to live my life these days.
Here. And I gotta say, all you have to do is look at your website, and you can tell all the different work you're doing to you're living out what your heart is telling you to do. would you like to suggest to, yeah, of course. Would you like to suggest to the listeners maybe some ideas on how we could, simple ideas on how maybe we could contribute and help?
To what I'm doing in particular, or
Just to live in right relationship. For example, I'll
sure.
say this. I remember when I started Herb Rally about 7 years ago. I started a scholarship fund because I wanted to help one person per year attend an herb school, an in-person apprenticeship. And guess what? I didn't make any money for like 3 years. And then I just kind of dropped the idea. And I was like, oh, one day I would like to contribute in this way. Like, I think
Yeah.
it's so important for people to go to apprenticeships, in-person apprenticeships, and learn
Mhm.
in the woods from directly from a teacher. Not necessarily, I love online education and books. It's great, but like, there's nothing
Yeah.
beats like in-person apprenticeships. So I guess I'm saying this story because I'm like trying to like maybe get some ideas from you on how besides that can we
Yeah.
help with this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So gosh, there's so many different ways. And I think if you do have an herbal program, if you teach classes, if you have an herb school, if you have conferences, any kind of education you offer, think about all the ways that you can make it accessible, whether that be scholarships, whether that be work trade options, whether it be organizing carpools,
Mm,
those types of things. Think about if you're an herbal medicine maker, what can you give away? I got trained through what was Herbalista, what now is Floor and Forage out of Atlanta,
mm,
and just last year. And so I'm going to start doing pop-up clinics in Cherokee and potentially also downtown Asheville. And so anybody who's a clinical herbalist, start thinking about that. How can you offer some free clinics for
mm.
folks? How, like, doing simple things like wild tending, right? That takes some education to know how to do, but things like collecting wild seed and spreading them, things like growing herbs in our gardens and giving them away, doing the like grow a row things and growing food to give away, working with organizations like Herbalists Without Borders. I'm going to just open it up and say, if y'all need help, you can email me and I will help you brainstorm on all of those things. But I mean, also just to me, creating a gratitude practice and harvesting sustainably and responsibly, and creating a gratitude practice. So how are you going to give gratitude for what you're harvesting? Things
Great
like that.
ideas. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. You brought up Latin names earlier, and I feel like that's a good transition into talking about your upcoming course. Perhaps when this is published, it'll already be released, but it's the Botany Breakdown. I was curious if you wanted
Mhm.
to tell the listeners about the Botany Breakdown. I gotta say, I never really thought about Latin names in the way that you were suggesting, like, oh, it's like this pretentiousness thing, which is kind of funny because when I say Latin names, I do feel quasi pretentious. I remember when I
Right.
worked at Mountain Rose Herbs, I used to my coworker Pam would say some plant name, some common name, and I'd be like, oh, Artemisia vulgaris, something like that. And yeah, I felt like I was almost showing off, but to me it was kind of fun.
Mhm.
But knowing the history now, or at least hearing it from your perspective, that's disheartening, to
Right.
say the least. But I will say you have this course coming up, Botany Breakdown. I'm presuming you do end up using a lot of the Latin
Mhm.
terminology. But yeah, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about the course?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks. Botany is so near and dear to my heart, of course, being a botanist and being a female botanist. Y'all, there's not enough of us out there. So please learn botany. And I like to flip it around. And I don't say like, don't use botanical names because it's classism. I say, let's all empower ourselves with that knowledge, because it does tell us about the plants. Like I heard this story once from somebody who was ordering lobelia through an herb catalog, and for whatever reason, the company they were ordering from didn't have botanical names in their catalog. And it turned out that they got a different species of lobelia, and they only knew that because they knew that lobelia inflata, the main, like most commonly worked with species of lobelia for remedies, has inflated seed pods. And so they knew that, and there were no inflated seed pods in what they got. And so they weren't sure what species it was. So I feel like it can really empower us. It can also like make it more accessible, because we can talk to anyone anywhere in the world and know we're talking about the same plant and communicate that way. And I do the same thing. Like sometimes, like I live in Appalachia, there are so many different regional names for plants, and it can be very confusing. So I will have to ask people, like, which species is that? So I just want to make it accessible to people. And I feel like, unfortunately, especially in the white male dominated botany world of the US, the way that botany is often taught is very inaccessible. I've been to people's classes, and sometimes I don't think they even realize that they are not even saying the common or English name of a plant. And for someone who's very much a beginner to relate to a Latin name, which, like, Latin names can sometimes be great because they can describe a part of the plant and tell us more about that plant, like inflata, right? But sometimes they're just named after some dead white dude, and it tells us nothing about the plant. And often that person was a racist. So, like, there's those kinds of things. So I say empower yourself with those things, but also learn where they came from. Learn how to identify the different parts of the plant. Learn the tools that you can use, the physical tools to help you, and learn the other tools like mnemonic devices I use a lot, and especially connect with that plant. So that's really why I created the program too. I say it's a virtual botany course for herbalists, foragers, and everyone else. So I'm kind of focusing on herbalists and foragers because I think that a lot of herbal teachers and foragers don't themselves know botany, or maybe they know it, but in a more experiential way and not in a way that's easy to teach. And a lot of times it's because it's intimidating because of those Latin names, right? So I want to make it easy. I want to make it accessible. I want to make it available virtually so that it's accessible to everyone. And I do talk about those Latin names and why they were created and how they make things inaccessible and how it's racist and classist. And I talk about land acknowledgement in there, which I think is super important. So talk about things like using a hand lens or a loop and why that's important in herbalism. And we cover about 11 plant families, so some of the most common plant families in the US and Europe for sure, and throughout the world, but especially those places because those are what I have the most experience with. But honestly, once you learn those families, they are the most common ones. So you could be anywhere in the world and start to recognize the parts of those plants and maybe not know which specific species it is, but know which family it is in. So then that would tell you, like, oh, I can tell that this is in the mint family. So I know that it's probably going to be safe to ingest, probably going to be good for digestion. might be antimicrobial, things like that. So I think it just makes us all better at what we do to know botany, and it takes that fear and overwhelm out of it.
So I was actually going to ask you why you thought it was important for herbalists to know botany. It almost borderline sounds like you kind of covered that. Me personally, from my background, as I mentioned before, I went to Columbine School of Botanical Studies, and it really helped me. Like you were talking about seeing plant families when you're out in the woods or whatever, out in nature, and to me, like that really kind of helped me through that wall of green, as they call it. I started seeing like individual species, individual plant families. To me, it just helped me kind of feel more connected when I'm out in nature. I know a
Yeah.
lot of herbalists don't necessarily emphasize botany, and for me, like it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that. But of course, there's lots of amazing herbalists out there that do great work despite that. So I was wondering if you wanted to kind of add layers to that as far as like why botany is important. Otherwise, we could kind of just move on to talking about your other school and its courses.
Yeah, sure. I guess I want to clarify that there are a lot of different ways to learn botany, and the Latin or botanical names are a tiny piece of that. Most indigenous, well, I shouldn't say most, a lot of indigenous people don't know Latin names for plants. And it doesn't mean they're not good herbalists,
Right,
or
right.
foragers,
They're the best.
wildcrafters. They're the best, right?
Yeah.
It just means there's a lot of different ways to learn botany, and they already know these things. So depending on how I don't want to stereotype or lump together all indigenous people by any means, but for people who have grown up in indigenous culture, they learn these things because they're passed down, and so they just go out wildcrafting with their relatives. For the rest of us, that may not be a thing that we've ever had a privilege to do. So I think it doesn't come natural for a lot of us. And for some people, like, I co-led a plant walk on the Appalachian Trail. And afterwards, one of the students came up to me and was like, I super appreciate what you do. And like a lot of the time when you talked, I felt like it was just like Charlie Brown's teacher talking, and like, and just like, and I was like, that's hard to hear, but also it's important for me to hear. And I think part of that was like the Latin names, it's like people, we all learn in different ways. And so I try to be really aware of that, partly because of the way that I have learned also, that most of what I've learned hasn't been academic. And so teach these ways to connect with plants in a way that we learn them and we know we can recognize them, whether we know the plant, the Latin names or not, where we can feel confident in harvesting them, where we can feel connected to them when we go out, when they become our friends, and like you said, it breaks down that green wall or that plant blindness, right? Where a lot of people just, they just see this green wall. And so it breaks that down and individualizes them for us and helps us be better herbalists and foragers.
I did not learn in the sense where, like, say, knowledge was passed down from generation to generation. I got into this in my early 20s, and so I can only speak from my personal experience. But if you're a beginning herbalist and you're like intimidated by all of this botany stuff, I will say this. I'll quote my herb mentor, Howie Brownstein, repetition is the key to mastery. And what we did was, we would go out every weekend and look at the same plant species over and over and over, and talk about the different plant characteristics. We keep talking about Latin names, but really what the important part when it comes to botany is what are the plant characteristics.
Exactly.
And I'm curious, I do want to talk more about your other course, but I'm curious, do you use a botanical key to identify, or do you have a different methodology?
Yeah, sometimes I do. And I will say, like, okay, so Botany in a Day is an awesome book. And I would recommend, if you want to learn botany, like, it's one of the top books that I recommend. And you can't learn botany in a day. Okay. But you can learn the characteristics of one family, maybe in a day, if you have good memory. And so I think I'm really glad that's what you said. It's more about recognizing the plants and starting to recognize. So, like, before we got on the call, okay, so I wore this shirt because I love roses and I like to wear things with plants when I'm teaching them, talking about plants. And so the rose family is one I cover in the course. It's a huge one. Like, so a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the food that we eat is in the rose family, a lot of the fruit, and nuts. So, like, almonds are in this family. And of course, all the roses and pears and apples
Cherries.
and cherries and some of the berries and so many things. And so, like, roses in the wild don't grow like this. Like, they have 5, right? They were bred to be like
5
this.
petals,
They
a
have
floral
5
cup.
petals. Yeah, and they actually like, they were bred to be red. Like, from what I've learned, there's no naturally red wild roses. So interesting.
That is interesting.
But yeah, in the wild, they have 5 petals. So some of y'all may be able to recognize a blackberry flower. And because blackberry is in this family and it has 5 white petals. Multiflora rose is an invasive rose here in the US, but it has 5 petals like other native. I don't know if y'all can see this. This Carolina rose on my arm.
That's badass.
Yeah. I wanted a native rose, but
for all you podcast listeners, she's showing her tattoos on the YouTube channel, so check that out.
Forgot about that. Yeah, so all these wild rose family things have 5 petals. That doesn't mean that every plant you see that has 5 petals is going to be in the rose family, but it's a good indicator. And it has a lot of stamens, right? The male reproductive part. So we start recognizing these things, and, like, before I ever learned, quote unquote botany or academic botany, I learned to start recognizing those things. And a lot of times, like, I haven't committed those things to memory, like, oh, the mustard family has this many long stamens and this many short stamens. Like, I just look at a mustard family plant and I recognize it because I've seen it a million times. So it's creating that for people and, like, letting them know, like, these are the reproductive parts. And, like, if it has a bunch of male reproductive parts, it's going to look different than something that has fewer reproductive parts. Or if the female reproductive parts are fused, it's going to look different than the ones that aren't. So just things like that, like, some people call it the pattern method of identification, like, especially in that book, Botany in a Day. It's just creating those patterns for people, just like using mnemonic devices. Any tools, so botany is important because it gives us those tools, I guess, right? It gives us, like, a toolkit that we can carry around with our hori and our pruners. To make us better at what we do, to make us safer herbalists, so that we know that we're harvesting the right thing, to help us know, like, which things we need to harvest more carefully and which ones are invasive, and we can harvest more of those while still being super sustainable.
You were talking about like pattern recognition and stuff like that, and I had this analogy pop up in my head. You know, when you can't really remember a password per se on your computer,
Yeah.
but your fingers kind of get that pattern. Like
Mhm.
you don't know exactly what it is, but you know how it feels to like type it out with your fingers. So that kind of reminds me of that. Like you could memorize, you know, like square stems and opposite leaves, or you could kind of just like recognize these certain patterns in nature. I
Exactly.
don't know why I thought of that, but that's kind of a funny analogy. But I will say, I'm looking at your website right now, and you cover mint, mustard, rose, maple, oak, and beech, peas and beans, carrots, the grass family, aster and daisy, pine, and cypress. So that's quite a few different plant families. I like that you threw in some trees in there as well.
Yes, definitely. There's not enough out there about tree medicine. It's
Yeah.
like so amazing. There's so much good food and medicine in the trees, and it's not talked about enough at all. And so, yeah, it's super important. And I think once you have enough tools, you can put them together
Yeah.
and do it better and have
Amen.
more to choose from, right? More plants to choose from to put in your apothecary, and more to connect with around you. And 90 to 95% of my huge apothecary is wildcrafted by myself
Wow.
and my students. So
That's awesome.
it really is.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. I
Mhm.
would love to see it someday. So you are in Asheville, yeah?
Right now, currently, so I'm in a weird situation, but
Okay.
I just moved from the place I was in about an hour from Asheville
Oh,
into my partner's house while we've been home hunting for quite a while. And then immediately, as the way things go, found a house. So I'm kind of in a temporary place, but our new place is in Asheville, just outside of the city limits, but still Asheville address. And so that's why you can't see my apothecary behind me, because it's very sadly in storage right now. But
okay.
luckily, I know the plants growing right outside.
There you go. Asheville is one of my favorite cities. I love it there, and
Oh,
man, and I can't
sweet.
wait to visit. So, did you want to
Yeah.
cover some of the classes in your other course?
Sure. Yeah. So I did just want to mention real quick, botany breakdown right now until it is finished filming and being edited. We're just releasing it as each unit is completed. And so that's 50% off in pre-sale. So take advantage of that. And you also get to, since it's in beta testing version, you get to give feedback on what works for you or what doesn't, or what you would like to see more of. And so I have an herb school curriculum, which is Wildcrafted Herb School. The wildcrafting piece is super important to me because, like, one, like we said, like when the pandemic hit, everything went online. And I think online is amazing because it makes it accessible to so many more people from all over the world, and to people who work regular day jobs and can't take off to do things and are single parents like I was. But like you said, I think it's so important to learn from a person. A lot of that I didn't get to do and I had to do on my own, and it's so much harder. So I say that my herb school is a different kind of herb school because we do work with social justice. We go out to Cherokee one of the days and study with real Cherokee people on Cherokee land, which, I mean, honestly, where I live is technically Cherokee land,
Mm.
but it's unceded Cherokee land. And but we go into Cherokee itself. We get to see Tyson's apothecary. We get to work in the apothecary. We get to go out to the garden and see where Tyson and Granny are growing all of these traditional foods, and learn about traditional Cherokee food, and usually get to eat some of it as well, which is amazing, and try some of these remedies. We have a Menominee herbalist who's a teacher from your state of Wisconsin.
I was gonna say that sounds
And
familiar.
yeah,
I'm still learning.
yep. We have my dear friend Mark Williams, who you probably know,
Love Mark.
amazing ethnobotanist who teaches, he is biracial and teaches about the roots of herbalism and the African roots of herbalism, African American herbalism, and racism in herbalism. We learn about ecology and habitat. We learn about medicinal mushrooms. We go outside as much as we can and actually do some wildcrafting and learn about what we can sustainably harvest, how to identify it, and how to sustainably harvest it, and then how to make the remedies, and everybody gets to take the remedies home. We have a medicine show at the end of the course, which is really super fun. Everybody makes something to give away to everyone else. We also, some of everything we make gets given through the nonprofit to the communities that we work with. And we talk about social justice. We talk about right relationship every day of the class. And it's only 2 days a month, and they're back to back. It's one Friday and Saturday a month. So people often travel. Sometimes like one person is traveling from California right now for those weekends. So yeah, I try and make it super accessible, and we have a lot of fun. One of the things I love about it most is the community that's created. People will often connect outside of class and work together to learn. So it's really, really fun.
I guess I got 3 thoughts on that. The herbal gift giving at the end of the I almost said semester, at the end of the class. I love that idea, and I presume everyone in the class just wants to make like their best product and give it to their friends, and like, you know, it's like, I bet that's a really fun and magical time for the students. The other thing I wanted to say was shout out Mark Williams. I do love that guy, and I gotta have him on the podcast whenever I can. And last but not least, I want to say like kudos and thanks to you. You're doing like amazing work, and just listening to this past hour, I'm like super inspired, and I know the listeners are going to be too. So like, thanks for all the work you're doing, and we all play our little part in this herbal realm and in the world, and I think you're doing awesome work. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome. Thank you. I really thank you for thanking me. I take that very seriously.
Please do. Please do. I still have a few more questions if you're down to keep rolling. I did want to plug your book. As I said previously, I didn't actually know that you wrote a book. So if you want to tell the audience about, oh, there you go. Okay. The Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders. So do you want to like kind of give a brief synopsis of what that's all about?
Sure. So this is actually was part of my apothecary. It was staged a little bit, but my dehydrator is right there in the corner. And those are my jars of herbs in the back. And this is a wild salad I made. And then this is infused vinegar with violet leaves. And probably dandelion, some other things. So it's the Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders, Farmed and Foraged Herbal Remedies and Recipes. So that's what it is. And I will say, I actually got asked to write this book by the publisher. So if I had it to do over again, they chose the title. I would not have gone with this title because one, and this is a great message for all of you folks out there who might want to write a book, don't niche yourself out. I would not have made it in that tiny little niche of homesteaders. I mean, homesteading is growing, but then unfortunately, I found out not that long ago that homesteading actually has very racist roots. So it's based on the Homesteading Act, which gave land away, and pretty much only white people, white settlers, benefited from it. So I would not do that again, but homesteading is super popular. So we can think of a different word for it. I also feel like, you know, homesteading, it's like people get so serious about it. It's really freaking hard to like homestead and do anything else. So I feel like people end up beating themselves up because they can't do it successfully and survive, like bring in enough money to pay the bills. So there's that. But anyway, these are, we can give it our own name. We can just call it the Herbal Handbook, whatever. But there's beautiful pictures in here that a local photographer, Jack Sorokin, took. And it has lots of cool stuff in here. Like this is actually So
That's
lovely
really
on
pretty.
the
Oh
inside,
yeah.
right? Oh my God,
Yeah.
that is my knife. Those are my pruners. And those are all things that I harvested. So
Love it.
it tells you things like how to sustainably harvest bark, and that I prefer to harvest twigs instead of bark whenever possible. That's cherry, by the way.
Yeah.
It does things like each
Prunus.
prunus. That's right. Prunus with the pruners. It does things like each chapter focuses on a couple remedies, and then in there's materia medica at the end of each chapter. So like a glossary kind of the different herbs, and with beautiful pictures. And it tells you information about each one, some growing tips, contraindications, and because it's for homesteading, how to work with those plants with children and animals as well. So pretty cool there. And maybe my favorite part, the last chapter here is all about eating herbal through the seasons. So making our food our medicine, right? Which I think is the best way to do it. So like these are my burdock pickles right there. Super yum.
Delish.
Yeah. So it's all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, you know, one of my dear friends and assistants said something awesome, because I was like, you know, it's this little niche of homesteaders. Not everybody has a homestead or has that privilege or wants to homestead. And she was like, your homestead is in your heart. And I was like, oh yeah. So we can grow plants on a balcony, right? We can grow plants in a window. So in an apartment, you know, anywhere there's a tiny little, like there's enough room for a pot. So I just want to remind people. So it tells people how you can grow things and how you can wildcraft them. And you can find that at thewanderschool.com.
I was going to ask, yeah. So as far as like linking to the book, if we could avoid Amazon, so it is on your website then?
Yes, it's on my website. I used to personally send it out, but that was a lot of work. So now I just send people to the publisher. You can get it there. It's also for sale at a lot of small bookstores and some bigger ones, but several bookstores around Asheville as well.
Out of curiosity, who is the publisher?
The publisher is Quarto, which is a division of Hachette Publishing.
Nice. It's a very beautiful book. For those that missed it, who are just listening to audio, check out the YouTube video or on I'll leave a link to it in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So you said something earlier, like I said, a lot of the things you were going over in your intro is like, oh, I gotta like ask her about that. But I pre-wrote this question. This is actually an audience submitted question, and it's yeah, what does the herbal industry need most right now besides more herbalists? And you said that earlier, like, oh, we need more herbalists, which, you know, I agree. But so the question is specifically, what do we need most right now besides more herbalists?
Yeah.
If you've got something.
That's such a good question. I feel like more connection is the biggest one. And that's like all of these things, right? So like Granny said, it's all connected. Everything is connected. So yes, in herbalism, we need more connection. We need more connection with the plants that grows right outside our doors. And we need more connection between herbalists. So I am working on creating ways that this can happen, and ways that we can get together in person, like we were talking about before. Online is awesome, and I think we can create online communities in real time. And everybody is just so isolated now. I feel like even if we live in cities, so finding ways to get together with other herbalists and go out in the woods together, create study groups, my friend and herbalist Leslie Alexander gave me the idea for Herbal Hour, where you have 1 hour a month and you go to a library and you just get together and talk about herbs. So things like that. Some of my students do that together and they just study herbs together, like for lunch once a month. People taking plant walks together, even if you know very little, and just help each other out. So all of those things, connecting with the different communities around us, because there is so much to learn. Everybody has something to offer. So the granny on the corner, you know, if there is any kind of community near you, any kind of ethnic group, the amount that you can learn is amazing. So, and also connecting with our own heritage, right? So everybody is so focused on native plants and just poo-pooing invasive plants and hating on them. But like a lot of those, if you're a white European descendant, like those plants are in your DNA. So how can you connect, you know, with the mugwort on my arm here? And my heritage is Ashkenazi and Jewish. And I'm currently reading the book Ashkenazi Herbalism, and I'm learning like all of these European plants that are closely related or already grow here, and some are looked at as invasive. So how can we connect with those things that our body already knows and ingest those and plant them in our gardens?
Great answer. Yeah. My friend Logan Keister is Ashkenazi also, and he recommended that book. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe I'll leave a link to that as well. That's rad. Great answer. I was going to ask you what your spirit plant was, but I think I know what it might be.
Right?
Is it mugwort?
I would say mugwort is definitely a big one on the list for sure. Yeah.
Wormwood.
Yeah, I do love mugwort. It's a moon herb, you know, it's silvery underneath. So it glows, kind of shimmers in the moonlight. It's great for dreaming. And I love that. I'll put it under my pillow. Sometimes when I find it, it spreads so easily in the, like all of the places here. So I don't have to plant it, although I did last year and it was awesome. And yeah, great dewormer, great bitter. I love bitters so much. So adding it to a bitters recipe with maybe some other more tasty herbs as well. So yeah, it is a wonderful one as well.
Thank you. Well, I did want to plug your podcast again. That's Wander, Forage, and Wildcraft. And I did also want to say a shout out. That's actually where I learned about Derek Haynes, aka the Crazy Botanist or the Chocolate Botanist. I know he's done both, but he's going to be on the Herbalist Hour in the future, which I'm super excited. But yeah, I've had quite a bit of communication with him over the years, and that's all because I heard the interview that you did with him on your podcast. So can you tell us more about the podcast? Do you release episodes? You still release episodes pretty frequently, yeah?
Yeah, it's it's tough. I'm like so curious. That was one of the things I want to ask you, how you do it so frequently. With all the million other things that I do, it's very hard to do them regularly. But I'm trying to get more regular, like maybe monthly releases. Great. And I've also, like, I'm in the middle of 2 moves, so things are crazy. But yeah, I'm trying to do them monthly, or aspiring to do them monthly. And my next one is very close to coming out. Maybe by the time this airs, it'll be out, and that's with Linda Black Elk, which I'm super excited about.
Nice.
And so yeah, Wander, Forage, and Wildcraft. I interview wanderers, foragers, and wildcrafters from around the world, and try to make that a very diverse group of folks. And A lot of the folks give me recipes, so that is really fun. And then there's a blog article that goes along with it that has the recipe in the blog. And then I also have a Patreon site, so patreon.com/the Wander School. And you can find that on the website, wanderschool.com. And people support at as low as $10 a month. They support the making of the podcast, they support the nonprofit work we do, and they get bonus interviews from the podcast. So
Cool.
it's really fun. Like Linda and I talked about fermentation,
Oh.
and that was super duper fun. And then she gave me a recipe for Korean style fermented, I think they were fermented dandelion greens. So yeah, it was really, really fun. And trying to remember what Derek and I talked about. I think we talked about like some sodas and things like that. But
Oh, cool.
yeah, he's super fantastic. And honestly, like, I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. Like, all of my co-teachers and everybody I have on my podcast, like, a lot of them are friends. And whether they're my friend yet or not, they do become my friend. But whether they are or not, they're all people that I teach with and have on my podcast because I want to learn from them. So
it's really
like,
just a selfish motive.
it pretty much is. Yeah. But I think it would also be super fun for other herbalists. And, I just want to give you props, Mason, because what you do is amazing. To be able to put out as much content and education as you do, as frequently as you do, is really incredible. And I've been listening to them recently, and it is just so heartwarming and connecting, because again, it can be lonely to be an herbalist, and it's such a good reminder that there are people out there doing this work just like we are every day. So and just like the amazingness that you learn from all these herbalists, so many of these herbalists, like, we never hear their names, right? So thank you for giving voices to that and getting this incredible information out into the world.
You're giving me goosebumps. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really do feel like it's my contribution. So yeah, it's just fun. Like I said, like, herbalists are my favorite people, and it's fun to help broadcast their voices, at least via the Herb Rally channel. So yeah, I really, really appreciate that. I'm stoked to get to know Derek more. I would love to hit up North Carolina and actually do some in-person video stuff with him and Abby Artemisia. But yeah, one of these days it'd be amazing. But let's do a random question. I don't know if you saw this on one of the previous episodes, but I'm just gonna pull a card from here. Yeah, and we're gonna do, it's called Let's Get Deep Friends Edition.
I love it.
Yeah, and I'll just choose a random card here. How would you survive a zombie apocalypse? Oh, can I tell you something else I've noticed? The cards that I've always choose are perfect for that week's guest.
That's hilarious.
So I think this is a great one for you.
Yeah, it is. Well, I should probably say that there was a conference I went to where Seven Song actually titled his classes. Were you there? You know what I'm talking about?
No, I know the title. I've seen this on his Instagram before.
Yeah. So I guess he teaches it in various venues, but so it would be a great one to ask this. But and he makes it really hilarious. I'm probably going to make it maybe slightly more practical, but and less ridiculous. But Seven Song is an awesome teacher, and I super appreciate him. So what? Okay, read it again.
How would you survive a zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, well, I have to say that my friends and students all say that if there was a zombie apocalypse, they would want to be with me when it happens because I can identify the plants.
Yeah.
So, what would I do? I mean, I think, should we make this like slightly more practical? Like, okay, so there was just a pandemic, right? And people were freaking out about toilet paper. Like, first of all, there's natural options for toilet paper, right? And we really want to know which plants those are and which they're not, first off.
Yeah.
So if you couldn't go to the store and buy toilet paper, you would want to know, some people say mullein, yes, some people say mullein, no. So on the fence about that one.
Yeah.
I will say I have used Spanish moss for toilet paper, and everybody says don't use Spanish moss because it's got chiggers in it. But my friends taught me that if you harvest it off of a tree where it's hanging and still growing instead of off the ground, usually there's not chiggers in it. So there you go on that one. It's important to me to put away food. And so Linda talks about this in our interview, but like just doing a little bit at a time as much as you can. So preserving food, you can make it fun by fermenting things, but just like drying plants, drying herbs, like anything I feel like can be an herb that's from a plant, but drying plants for food and for medicine. This is a good plug here. I have a second book that I self-published that is now just digital. That's called the Wild Forage Life Cookbook. And I have a bunch of my recipes in there. It's really fun. I try to use, for the most part, as few ingredients as possible. So really learning how to cook wild foods, and again, eating our medicine, right? So I love wild spices. So like we talked about, I just barely mentioned bee balm earlier. So I preserve a ton of bee balm. I just dry it and I infuse it into salt. It's so freaking delicious. Also ramp leaves. So to harvest ramp super sustainably, and I only harvest one leaf per plant, and then infuse those into salt. Because like if the zombie apocalypse happened, I'm a foodie, and like let's face it, like I want to have yummy stuff to eat. So having wild spices, and like if an apocalypse hit, we couldn't go to the store, I always say like what are the most important nutrients that we're going to need besides just like some remedies, right? Things to keep our immune system healthy. We're going to really quickly need protein and fat. So some really good things for that would be mushrooms and nuts. So knowing how to process those things, knowing how to identify mushrooms, which honestly, I feel like is harder than identifying plants because they have, to me, fewer identifying characteristics, but I do harvest probably about 30 species of mushrooms.
Wow.
Yeah, which I freaking love mushrooms.
Yeah, me too.
So as food and medicine. And then nuts are kind of a pain in the butt, but the ones that need less processing, like pecans, super delicious, lots of fat and protein. You can harvest them off the ground. So I also kind of harvest black walnuts, but oftentimes they end up sitting around because I don't get around to processing them because they're a lot of work. But things like hazelnuts, super yummy. And just drying as many herbs as I can for tea. I had a tea business, so I love tea and have a ridiculous tea cabinet. So I think that's how I would survive a zombie apocalypse, is on what I've already preserved and what I am able to identify and harvest out of the wild.
So part of the rules of the game is I have to answer the question too, and my answer is really simple. I'll just become friends with Abby.
Yes. Well, you would have to come visit here. So this is my formal invitation to you, Mason. Come visit. We'll put you up and we will go foraging.
That would be amazing. Very cool. Well, It has been about an hour and a half. I do think that what we should do is a round 2 at some point, and we'll go over some more of these questions and just kind of go in depth on some more subjects. But of course, we want to shout everything out again. Definitely check out Abby's podcast. That's Wander, Forage, and Wildcraft. You could search for any podcast player. I use Podcast Addict, so not really what the norm is, but yeah, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts, wherever you're listening to this, or on YouTube. And then the website is thewanderschool.com. Is that correct?
That's it. Wander with an A.
Wander. That's right. And that's an acronym, which now I know why you do it in all caps.
Yeah, exactly.
I was wondering what that was all about. All right. Very good. Well, any final thoughts or before we wrap up here?
Gosh, there's so much I could say, but I think I would just close with each one, teach one. The best way to learn and to reinforce your knowledge is to teach somebody else. I
love that.
There is this unfortunate thing in our culture about competition. And the thing that I love about herbalism is the connection and the community. So let's continue that. Let's empower everyone else with food and knowledge and healthcare.
Perfect way to wrap up. Each one, teach one. I love that. Well, thanks so much, Abby, and thanks to you all for listening. We'll see you in the next episode of the Herbalist Hour. Take care.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the Herb Rally podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at Herb Rally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from Herb Rally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.